Thank you again, Dr. Mosley. So now I will invite our very own Dr. Sougata Bardhan up to the podium to share a little bit more about the work that we do in our lab here at Lincoln, the Forestry and Natural Resources Management Lab.
So while the presentation is being put up, so I would also like to welcome you at the second forest farming workshop. So this is again an acknowledgement to NCR SARE, North Central Region Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education, which funded this professional development grant with the goal to train the trainers who can then talk with the landowners and the farmers about forest farming. So, okay. So what I will talk today is less about forest farming, but more about what agroforestry research is happening at Lincoln University. To give you a little background, I came from the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry, which was my training and sort of knowing about agroforestry for the first time when I came to the center in 2010. And I was there until 2021, first as a postdoctoral fellow and then as a research faculty there working on various agroforestry projects. So what I will do here is to bring everybody on the same page. And again, this is the train the trainer model. So there are probably some folks online who are not familiar with agroforestry. I know many faces who are very familiar with agroforestry. But to bring us all on the same page about agroforestry, I'll do a quick introduction about agroforestry, couple slides on the benefits of agroforestry. Then we will go into the agroforestry research currently happening at Lincoln University. And then some challenges of what we face and ways forward. So I would like to start with this quote from a famous, many of you probably know Aldo Leopold, and he said, we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. So what that quote tells us is that in our ever-increasing appetite for more productivity, more profits, we have often regarded land as something that we own rather than considering us as something where we coexist with the land. So, and many of the, and again, I do understand that we have a burgeoning world population that we have to feed. But we have to be careful that we are able to feed that burgeoning population because we hear about desertification, we heard about land degradation. So in that appetite for increased productivity, we probably are losing more land unless we take good care of the land. And that's where agroforestry helps. So as I said, a quick introduction to agroforestry. Agroforestry must satisfy 4 I's. So that is what we teach in agroforestry classes. So these are 4 I's, integrated, intentional, interactive, and intensive. I'll quickly explain what those mean. So using these 4 I's, if we define what agroforestry is, it is the intentional integration of trees and crops or livestock where the interactions are intensively managed. As you know, row cropping is very simple. So you create wide swaths of land where you plant one crop. We have developed big machines which can operate on these huge open spaces. agroforestry is different. So we are intentionally putting trees. Obviously, we are not going to drive our combine over the trees. So we have to be intentional how we integrate those trees on the landscape and how we incorporate the alley crops or other crops or livestock in those spaces. In doing so, we are obviously increasing the biodiversity, we are increasing productivity, revenue, and most importantly, we are improving the resilience of the system. So that's what agroforestry helps us in achieving. So this is an image. There are various types of agroforestry practices. So one on the left, shelter belts, hedgerows, timber belts, riparian management systems. So these are, I will define them. And on your right, we have alley cropping, silvopasture, and forest farming. So uh, if oops, if we go by USDA definition, there are 5 major agroforestry practices. Alley cropping, silvopasture, and forest farming, these are agroforestry farming systems. And the riparian buffers, which is classified here as riparian management, and shelter belts, timber belts, hedgerows, these are all lumped together as windbreaks. So these are called linear agroforestry systems. The benefits of agroforestry, as you all may easily understand, when we add trees, it helps in carbon sequestration. So instead of corn, soybean, or other row crops, having trees on landscape, you build up biomass within the trees. It also helps add material, organic material in the soil. So there is a lot of carbon sequestration benefit. And in terms of soil health, so again, having a biodiverse plant community helps the soil health in terms of water infiltration, microbial life, and other wildlife habitat, which helps with the whole soil ecosystem. And then microclimate regulation. So this is where we can, and as we will learn throughout this symposium about forest farming, by adjusting the microclimate in terms of what light penetration happens, what competition we can reduce, we can create shades and situations where we can grow other crops in that understory. In terms of ecosystem services, we see a diversity boost, obviously, by incorporating all these species. Soil and water conservation, I just mentioned, trees help in that process. Pollination, so with wild species, native plants, we can create environment where there will be a better habitat for the pollinators in that landscape. And so overall, agroforestry is a more resilient system that is probably going to help with some of the climate change and other problems we are facing also. In certain landscapes, row cropping may not be the option. So incorporating trees will give you a better chance as a farmer or landowner to have a better revenue from your land. So moving on to agroforestry research at Lincoln University. So I talked about the agroforestry farming systems and also the linear agroforestry systems. So it's a very exciting time at Lincoln University because we have all 3 agroforestry farming systems funded research happening. We began with the forest farming. That's why it's at the top. Then we started our silvopasture project. And very soon we will begin our alley cropping project. So these are located at Lincoln University Busby Farm. That is where our forest farming project began in 2022. It's funded through my McIntyre Stennis capacity project funding. We also started a collaborative project between Lincoln University and University of Missouri on silvopasture. That is also happening at the Busby Farm. where we are using goats as a novel tool for forest management, eliminating invasive or controlling invasive species, and while also producing a meat product, which right now we are importing probably more than 50% from countries like Australia and New Zealand. So, and then lastly, this is a NRCS CIG proposal that was funded to establish an alley cropping project, and that will go up at HARF. It's at New Franklin. It's a University of Missouri farm on horticulture and agroforestry. So little detailed look at these various projects. So forest farming, again, I will not spend too much time because right after me, Raelin will talk about all the forest farming work that's happening here at Lincoln University. But it is, forest farming is operations that grow food, herbal, botanicals, or decorative crops under a forest canopy. And what I will draw your attention to is this quote from Sophie Yeo. It came out in BBC, and I was reading this article, and this line caught my attention. So it says, when the X beckons, these crops, meaning the non-timber forest products, these understory crops, provide a strong incentive to keep the forest standing. So that gives us a revenue stream. As a landowner, as a farmer, you want some income generation. So having that opportunity in forested land, in woodlots, gives that incentive to keep those woodlots standing. So again, a quick picture. So we did some timber stand improvement and prescribed burn, and this is the timeline. And again, I'll not spend too much time here. And right now we are into our second year. We will finish later this year of our forest farming project. And we also, I mentioned the forest farming workshop. It's again, Raelin, when she joined in, we applied for a forest farming workshop project. It's a professional development workshop. And this is a picture from last year's workshop. Moving on to silvopasture projects. Again, I mean, this is incorporation of livestock in forested landscape. And this work is also going to happen at the Busby farm. And this is where the silvopasture plots are being laid out. The benefit of silvopasture is reduced stress on the animal, controlling invasive species, better quality of life for the animals, and also ecological advantages. Again, controlling invasive species with goats, that's always beneficial, which can serve as food for these animals. So these are, again, this project is just getting started. This is our cute little goats with their babies. And hopefully next week, we will start our grazing rotations at Busby Farm. And lastly, alley cropping systems, again, funded by NRCS CIG. Alley cropping is planting crops between rows of trees to provide, again, income and while the trees mature. And it has been used in various parts of the world. So even in the US, so this is wheat among chestnuts. This is probably in the tropics where you have all kinds of vegetation growing. And this is corn with walnut. And since I mentioned I was at the Center for Agroforestry, this is from Dr. Joseph's work. So this is cotton in pine. So there are various forms of alley cropping systems that has been tried in this country itself. What we are proposing is a little different in the sense that this is mostly tailored to small farmers, and we call it PACs. So it's a productive alley cropping system. What we are designing is relatively small in size. As you can see, this whole footprint is about 1.1 acre. Again, because if we go back to the intentional intensive management, we cannot create something which will need huge labor, huge manpower. So what we are trying to design is something which can be managed by a household. So, and this is a research project. So a farmer may not use these 4 different species that we have here. So what we are trying to do is give some best management practice that the farmers can adopt. And so we have our tree rows. We also separate the tree rows with some native pollinator strips so that it can help with pollination of our cash crops in between. And we have these various cash crops. There is also opportunity to put beehives depending on your resources, your interest. You can make it even more productive. So you can add beehives in the tree rows. So we did a little calculation. So this is without the beehives, and we did a little calculation and these are projections, mind you, and this includes some of the cost of the materials and the revenue that you will get with moderate productivity and average sized selling price. So remember the plot size, it's 1.1 acres. And look at the revenue that will be coming out. And again, I mean, this is projection. Look at the revenue that is coming out, 191,765. So there is an asterisk because it does not include the cost of regular maintenance. But again, it's a 1.1 acre. If you have a household, if you have like 1 or 2 people helping you in your project, even if we lose 90% in management, yield loss, we are talking about $20,000. From 1 acre of land right now, if you do corn, soybean, what, 400, 500, 600, it's an excellent year, higher corn prices, maybe $700. We are talking 10, 20 times revenue from this. And again, this is research. So we don't know. Hopefully, we will find out in a couple of years and be able to talk about this. So again, these are the various agroforestry research happening at Lincoln University about all 3 agroforestry farming systems. To recap, agroforestry and sustainable agriculture are pivotal in mitigating climate change impacts and also promote carbon sequestration and ecosystem services. So as the climate pattern shifts, so agroforestry systems can be really helpful in creating a more resilient and diverse system. So thank you very much. I probably stayed on time. That's always difficult. So if you go to this QR code, it will take you to our lab page. And I don't think we are doing any questions. Okay, then it's open for questions. Yes. Uh-huh. Okay, that is a good point. So so when we are talking about, so this is when it is at full productivity. So using chestnuts, you are looking at 7 years, 8 years, depending on what type of planting material you use. And the cash crops, the elderberries, hardy figs, currants, gooseberry, you can hope to get income from them in 3-4 years. So within 3-4 years, and the chestnut will start producing in 3 years, not in its full potential, but yes, in about 7. So this number is probably looking at around 7-8 years time frame. But even before that, starting 3rd or 4th year, you will start to get some income. Great question. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Is the income there looking at more like farmers market price per pound or wholesale, and what?
So we, again, since this is a projection, so we looked at the minimum and maximum, and we picked something in the middle. So yes, if you take it to farmers market, you will probably get better prices, but then it involves more work and things like that. So we calculated these figures with average price, like right in the middle. Yes.
Yeah. I came late in your presentation, but you use a very strong forestry term, carbon sequencing. Can you kind of break it down for me?
Okay, sure. So are you talking about carbon sequestration? So it's more, I mean, I would not specifically say it is only related to forestry. I mean, we are talking about carbon sequestration in everything that we do, even in row crops. No-till farming is a way to increase carbon sequestration. Mainly what it means is you are probably aware about the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere. So before industrialization, we were probably somewhere around 320, 340 ppms. Right now, we are way past 400 ppm. So the more carbon dioxide goes up in the atmosphere, the environment becomes, or the climate becomes hotter because it's a radiation trapping gas. So it warms up the planet. So by carbon sequestration, we are wanting to put more carbon back in the soil, because as plants fix carbon from the atmosphere, they produce organic forms of carbon, which is sugars and other lignins, which are more resistant to degradation. So when we incorporate some of those, and with trees, the tree biomass, I mean, if you look at a cornfield, so after the season, everything is harvested. And in many cases, previously, we would plow and incorporate the residues in the soil. That will increase the rate of decomposition. So that carbon will be decomposed and will be released in the atmosphere as CO2. With trees, you have the tree trunk, roots, which stays there throughout the year for years. So you add some carbon in those systems by default. But even in corn production, even in soybean production, if you do no-till, if you do reduced tillage, you are increasing ways that more carbon stays in the soil as opposed to being released back in the atmosphere. So that is mainly carbon sequestration. So sequestering carbon into the soil. If you go back to pre-industrial agriculture, there used to be 5%, 6%, 7% carbon in the soil. If you go to any conventional crop field, you are probably looking at 2%, 3% in good soils. In some places, it's 1.5%. So that carbon that was in the soil was released in the atmosphere, and that's why we have the higher concentration now. So carbon sequestration, yes, in forested systems, we have a better opportunity having the trees, but even in croplands, we can increase carbon sequestration through putting the carbon in the soil. Yes.
Display of the different crops that you're utilizing. How do you go about selecting those plants to like intercrop together? What are your top like 2 or 3 things that you're looking for?
Right, that's a great question. So again, this is a research project that we came up with the design ourselves. And the way we looked at it is which ones have market. And again, our goal is to work, and Lincoln University being a 1890 land grant, we work with small farmers. So we are not talking about big orchards. So we are talking about small household sized systems. So we looked at which will give the best return for that farmer. So elderberries, hardy figs. So these have already established markets. So and this design is not extensive. You can. The good thing about agroforestry systems, these are very, very adaptive. Depending on what your interest is, you can design a system that fits your goals, your interests. So for our project, we picked those 4 species because there is relatively better availability of planting stocks. These have relatively better markets established because at the end of the day, as a farmer, you want to generate income which will be beneficial for your livelihood and your family situation. So that was the reason we picked those four species. But again, I mean, there is all kinds of opportunities. I mean, there has been, I mentioned I was at the Center for Agroforestry doing alley cropping. So what we did was putting warm season grasses in between the alleys because that was a biomass project. So you can, so those are less management intensive. So you can grow long, like if you have large land and you don't want to invest too much time in managing your system. So you can do biomass alley cropping system with warm season grasses, which you can sell. The idea there was to produce cellulosic ethanol, but that market is still there is some work that still remains for it to be profitable, commercially profitable. So, but that's also an option. So the options are endless, I might add. Yes.
I know that the people who are growing the trees in that project are sometimes hesitant to let the grazing animals near the trees, but those native warm season grasses only grow during the summer when the ground is dry. And during that time, the risk of soil compaction around the base of the trees is much reduced because it's not wet. So it is, I think, for people who are interested in silvopasture, I think there's a great opportunity to use native warm season grasses with these overstory trees.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So yes, if you are thinking about silvopasture and still have tree rows, that's a great option. I mean, during that time when, so that is the benefit of agroforestry practices. It's almost like a video game, and puzzle that you can create with all these pieces that is out there. So depending on what you want to do. So for us, we did not have any livestock there. It was mainly then we will harvest them and send it to a factory for production of cellulosic ethanol. But if you want to do silvopasture, that's always possible. And again, like I said, last phrase, it's the possibilities are endless. I mean, for everything there is MasterCard. Any other questions? Yes.
So if you are planting crops other than the trees, should those crops that you select be one that can grow higher than the tree or lower than the tree?
So that is a great question. So again, as I said, you have to design an agroforestry system. So you have to be mindful. You need some knowledge, so usually the tree rows are higher and in your alleys, you have the cash crops which are lower. You can design something which is different. And again, the idea is you have to have the knowledge about the tree physiology, like you have to space the tree rows wide enough that if you are planting something which needs light, you have enough light come to the alleys in between, because and then the orientation of the tree rows, so that light is not obstructed. And if you want to be a mechanized large scale, so what I showed here is suited for a small farmer. This can be expanded to a bigger orchard too. So in that case, you have to consider what type of equipments you want to use. So again, you can start, and I showed a 1.1 acre. You can do it in half an acre or a quarter acre. So that's why, if you are interested, we can talk more and with the species that you are interested in and how they can coexist. So it's intensive, interactive management where you have to make sure that one species does not, I'll not use the word does not may not interfere with the other species too much in terms of resource utilization and so forth, because then you won't have the productivity. So that knowledge is important. And going back to the goats, so if you have a alley cropping, you just started that planting, so you cannot have goats go right in at that time. So again, it has to be planned intensive management. So you need to have the knowledge of what each species will contribute in the system. If you have forested landscapes, woodlots, yes, putting the goats in there will probably not harm the trees as much. I mean, they will more likely have positive impact. But if you are starting a nursery orchard, you cannot let the goats free the first year. Probably chicken. If you still want to do agroforestry, you can put chicken. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
So hello again, everyone. At this point, you know who I am. I'm going to step up here today to just talk a little bit more specifics about the forest farming research that we're doing here at Lincoln, just to give an overview of what's going on with that project and what we hope to accomplish. So, let's see, make sure I have, perfect. So my project has this very long, inspiring title. Oh, don't have slides there. Um, and really, at the end of the day, we're looking at how different forest management practices can support the establishment and productivity of a forest farm. And so we chose specifically to look at thinning and burning, as these two approaches can manipulate the canopy layer and determine how much light hits the forest floor, and burning can reduce and shift the composition of the understory vegetation. Sort of an and together, we hope these could synergistically provide sort of optimal growing conditions for plants. So, why forest farming? I think at this point, I don't really have to convince anyone in this room, but just a few reasons why that have come about for our conversations is that it offers this opportunity to encourage active management of these forested woodlands. Thinking about the small farmer or landowner who may only have a little patch of woodlot at the edge of their property, typically it's not being actively managed and certainly not contributing to any source of income. Forest farming then can be sort of this avenue for encouraging them to get into this space and tend to it with the additional of these value added products, either for themselves or to sell at market. And then also thinking about in terms of like in situ conservation, by cultivating these plants, we have opportunities to increase their populations while also relieving the pressures of wild harvesting. And then something that I think is very cool about forest farming is that it is such a flexible and adaptable um, system, in that we can really design it for whatever needs are of the farmer and what will fit into their particular woods. So based off of my own research into the literature and traveling about and visiting different conferences and talking to landowners and natural resource professionals. And then, as part of my master's thesis research, which is where I looked at interests in different agroforestry practices, including forest farming, trying to gauge, what landowners are interested in, what are the specific knowledge gaps that we're seeing, and why isn't forest farming, with all the promises that it has for improving small farmer livelihood, improving forest health, why don't we see more of it on the landscape? Well, here are sort of four loosely guided themes that I see emerging. One being landowners aren't knowing how to actively manage their forests, specifically for forest farming. They're unfamiliar with the concept and the practices that are required to be successful in producing these non-timber forest products. And then, we also see on the other side, in terms of the development of nursery stock and planting stock, which has already come up in our conversation. I can attest to it. In trying to buy enough roots to establish the research here at Lincoln was a challenge. We were looking at purchasing over 3,000 plants. most nurseries do not have the capacity to do that at a price point that is available to the small farmer. And I think about for us, we have the ability of using grant funding to purchase these roots, so budget was less of a concern. But if I was a small farmer, it's unlikely that I'd be able to get sort of that critical mass to get going. And then lastly, sort of that economic perspective and how do we understand markets and support landowners in engaging in these markets. And if you've all taken a look at the schedule for today, it's very exciting for me. Our speakers will touch a little bit on all of these areas, highlighting, where we're at and the road forward. And so this project really looked at sort of developing those best management practices and determining how to set up a space for forest farming. Here are the specific objectives. They're pretty wordy, but essentially, we're just looking at how thinning and burning impacts the forest ecosystem by monitoring soil and understory plant community, and then how do our different non-timber forest plants respond to each of these growing conditions. As I mentioned earlier in our learning circle, I'm working with black cohosh and golden seal as two plants that have historically grown in Missouri and have a little bit more established markets. And then wild ginger as sort of more this ornamental shade plant. And it was already growing in the forest site. So I felt confident that we could have some data to collect, as well as just gaining more knowledge on this particular plant. So here is a little overview of the research plots just to get in your mind what's going on. And so for research, we want to have our replicated treatments. And so this is like the split plot by split plot design. So we have our thin and burn and control areas laid out over this 3-acre space down at Busby. And so you can see, the 2 areas that were burned and then the areas that were not burned. And I wanted to include this site map just to show how each of the individual beds where species were planted lay out over this space. Just to give an idea, I planted 108 different beds, over 3,000 plants. It was a fun time. But it's exciting now when you go out there and you can see all the little flagged areas where it's like, that's where our little plants are growing. So, and it was done in this layout to try to capture differences across the geography. We're working across a couple of different soil types, different slopes. Half the plots are more on this upland slope that has more oak and hickory trees, and then half of it trends down into a bottomland area where we get more pawpaw, and then of course some lovely cedar encroachment. So we hit on sort of all the main forest types that you might see on a farm here in Missouri. So what did we do? This slide is just showcasing an overview of our methodology for thinning. We were aiming for a specific canopy cover and less so a specific basal area or spacing. I'm trying to hit that 60% cover, which focuses on like the mid-range that most of these plants prefer to grow in. And then we did a dormant season burn last winter before planting last fall. And then in terms of soil monitoring, we went ahead and did soil samples to look at both the chemical profile and then soil microbial activity. And this was done at a baseline before we started doing any active research, and then right before we burned and right after, trying to capture if these management practices are influencing the soil properties. I'll take questions after. Thank you. So as I mentioned, last fall, I went ahead and planted all of our species. This is just the breakdown of how many plants were in each bed and total all plants, just to give an idea of the scale of planting material that I've been working with. And so for sourcing planting stock, we did go with Strictly Medicinals, which is an organic plant nursery out of Oregon. Part of the reason we chose that is Busby is a certified organic farm. So as much as possible, we're wanting that organic planting stock. And then wild ginger was just harvested and transplanted from populations already on site. So future work on this project will be continuing to monitor the growth and success of the 3 species, as well as the soil and understory plant community. And we're hoping to add in a layer of monitoring overall carbon flux in this system, as well as the photosynthetic rate of the plants, just to kind of gauge overall like how healthy and productive they're being. So I won't spend too much time on my next two slides. I toss in a little bit more about this workshop, of which Sougata already mentioned its funding origin from SARE. But I did want to emphasize the goal and motivation behind why we applied for this grant and why we're all gathered here today. So we're hearing more and more and seeing more and more landowners and producers being interested in the practice of forest farming, either for a hobby for themselves or potentially as an avenue for generating additional income. But there is a significant gap in technical assistance support. You know, a lot of our natural resource professionals, whether they're working for a state extension, whether they're in research or working for government organizations such as the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they may not have any idea or only a vague idea of what forest farming is, what it entails, and therefore they're unable to really support landowners in their journey in adopting this practice. So these workshops were designed as a space to gather in various experts from across the country, as well as our technical service providers, our extension staff, get us all in the room so we can have these conversations about the practice of forest farming and really build our ability to serve producers and landowners throughout the state of Missouri and the wider Midwest. And so, an overview of what we've been doing and what will come is having these really important dialogue together, as well as more formal presentations and hands on opportunities to really engage in what it means to do forest farming and how we can support the adoption um, throughout our landscapes and our farms here in Missouri. So, thank you so much for listening to my spiel. I already saw that we did have one question in the audience, so I'm happy to, if there's anything I sped through and you want to go back and talk about it more, we do have a little bit of time.
I'm not afraid to keep asking questions. I'm curious if you found any non-native invasive plant species in your plots beforehand, and if so, what were they, and what did you do with them? And yeah, just talk maybe a little bit about that.
Yes, they are definitely present because from what I know of the land use history of this space is it was historically grazed, um, probably slightly degraded, and then just sort of left to do whatever. So of course, those plants that are able to quickly come in and establish themselves are there. Quite a bit of multiflora rose and some honeysuckle, coralberry in pretty dense thickets. The goal of the burn was to try to at least set them back. And I haven't gone through and run the stats to say, like, with statistical certainty, this and this, but just through observing in the different areas, burning seemed to help reduce their vigor. But there's, one burn didn't eliminate them. I imagine if we don't go back in with more management in the next couple of years, they'll be back to full strength. So it certainly is something that we'll have to battle with and continue to consider. Those were the main two. There was also some grasses, which I'll be completely honest and be like, grass identification is not my jam. So I know there was some that clearly belonged to more of like a meadow type setting and probably shouldn't have been as far into the forest as I was finding them.
And there's all this discussion going on with burns
Mhm.
now. And I'm just really curious as I'm just starting to get to know them. And there's actually going to be one happening right next to my farm at some point in the next couple of months. With small farms and maybe close proximity to people and their buildings and the smoke pollution. I think we all suffered from the fires in Canada last year,
Mhm.
even all the way down in North Carolina. Are there concerns that way? How does it affect the people around you? Those are the questions coming up in my little farming community is, who has the right to do this and affect everybody? Can you touch on that?
Certainly. So full disclosure, I would say I'm still in training as like a fire person, but I've gone through several workshops and been on a couple burns now. And I'm sure Carter later will be able to provide, greater insight into the intricacies. But when doing a prescribed burn, it's a very methodical approach where you take into account winds, humidity, fuels, with the goal to really minimize those negative effects. Like we're trying to get good smoke lift, where smoke, instead of drifting to your neighbor's property, would vent up and away. So it disperses higher in the atmosphere, trying to minimize the amount of smoke that will be experienced by the neighbors. And a lot of thoughtful preparation goes into doing it. So I can talk a little bit more about what we did at our sites. We had very, very good fire breaks where we actually cut a path. We had to take out just a few trees, and then we raked down to the mineral soil and blew leaves. Like we wanted to make sure this fire was going not one lick outside of our burn areas. And so I think in minimizing concerns comes with careful planning, and for landowners, like encouraging them to work with somebody that has that training. Like I know here in Missouri, we've been working on establishing prescribed burn associations, which they're partnering with MDC, the Missouri Department of Conservation, to gather up landowners together and help them get the training they need, the tools they need, the professional consulting that they need, and then also a community that surrounds them. So when they're ready to burn, they can call on their neighbors who are a part of this association to help them safely do the burn. So I think having these layers of like education, establishing community, and certainly working with somebody who knows how to do burns safely can help minimize a lot of those concerns. It's just being very careful when you play with fire. Mhm.
So mine is not a question rather than a comment. So as Raelin mentioned, Carter helped us with our barns, and with careful planning and everything. He also has a business. So if you are wanting to have a very good meticulous barn expert, he's right in this room. Thank you.
So kind of circling back to that question that Badger asked and the situation with the invasive species, what's your management plan going forward? And is prescribed fire part of the management plan? And how do these species respond to, continued prescribed fire treatments?
That is a great question, and something that I've been thinking over myself. Because in the original like project timeline, it was to start with one burn, sort of to get the establishment phase going, and then it would be a 3-year project taking data during that time. In digging more into the burning literature, I've come across some papers where people are starting to try to track the response to these types of plants to being burned. And it seems that if you time it out well, like thinking about burning in the fall after they've gone through their reproductive phase, they're starting to go dormant, that they handle fire fairly well. Especially when you take into the account that doing prescribed fire, the goal of most woodland burns is to be relatively mild and not too intense, where we're not significantly heating up the ground. Um, and so, to answer the question about how we want to go with management going forward, I'm in this space of exploring like, do we have the capacity to do another burn? Does that fit into our research objectives? So, that's still in the works. I can't say too much more detailed than that, but it's something that I'm definitely considering after having a few more conversations with mentors.
Raelin, just because I haven't seen all these individual plants on the sites now, is there, how feasible, based on your map, it looked like they're everywhere. Do you feel like but I saw some bedding as well, and I wondered if you felt like excluding some from fire or including, is that feasible on this scale, do you think, to do like some sort of part exclusionary fires, I call them. I don't know what you would call them, but
So you're asking like if we could in the burn units burn around where we planted something?
Yeah, just because there's yeah, so like a lot of our, yeah, especially in the pre-burned area where we've reduced the fuels, if you just did a small backfire for 10 yards. I only know this out of personal experience. I have people that, my parents included, that plant herbs in their front yard and then do a driveway fire, we call it, you know? And so I just wondered if you feel like some of these plants respond well, but obviously some of them may not, and you don't want to risk your um, planted anyway. So I just wondered what your, I know you're not actually planning this, but what you instinctually, if you felt like if you owned this and wanted to keep them alive, would you try something like that?
Mm. Based off of just observing the wild ginger and bloodroot that's already growing on site, they seem to come back real happy after being burned. Even in the areas that we lightly tilled to plant, the bloodroot came back, which actually shocked me because I was under the impression that that much disturbance would not be good for this type of plant. So I don't know if just the stars all aligned to my specific situation and they were like, heck yeah, we have more space to grow. Um, I think that if someone was really concerned about damaging the plants, especially I'd be worried if like I wouldn't, let's say burning right after transplanting might be tough on them or something like that. You could probably burn around a bed, especially if it was like a producer who had just a couple of beds planted in one area. The way this project is set up with replication, it would be logistically nightmarish to try to burn around everything, especially considering how winds might change and beds are just everywhere. So I think that could be an option, which would be interesting to explore. And I think the chance to potentially burn these guys where it is for research and see what happens could really be insightful to be like, hey, maybe fire is okay to just go right over the top, or you may want to really consider burning around in X, Y, or Z situation. Yes, Badger.
I just want to advocate for if you're primarily interested in herbs, a dormant season burn where you're not going to hurt the above ground portion of these slow growing perennial herbs, but you will still girdle the woody stem of Linicera macchii or whatever these invasive honeysuckles are. Uh, uh, if you can time it so that you're basically weeding the landscape a little bit and not negatively impacting any herb vegetation, then I think that's a really good way to thread the needle. And for such small areas, I think you get a good group of people from your prescribed burn association over, and you're just basically, you've got 8 or 10 people just watching some burns, a series of small burns that are the size of your front yard. And especially if you're certified organic, I think it's great. You don't have to do all this, cut stump triclopyr application if you can wrap your head around doing this at the right time of year to fit for the phenology of your non-timber forest product crops.
Definitely. That goes back to we can really shape forest farming and the managements to fit the particular site and landowner. And so with that, thank you all for those questions. I'm going to cut myself off as the timekeeper of this event. One online question? Oh, awesome. I will take time for online question. So has any research been done on potential urban agroforestry projects? So I know there's been quite a bit of work done on what's termed urban food forest, which is essentially a smaller scale forest, like a planting that's modeled after forest with different layers. Usually they incorporate mainly edible foods, either like fruit and nut trees, greenery underneath. And so that is something that's been done. Lincoln isn't actively doing any like urban agroforestry type projects. We're focused more on the agricultural space at this time. But I know other universities, University of Missouri does a little bit of at least outreach on it in terms of research. A lot of other organizations are like, I believe that I'm gonna blank on the name. I know USDA, NRCS, the Center for Agroforest, or National Center for Agroforestry, does a little bit of outreach and work on it as well. I can try to find some resources to share in the chat. Cool.